I knew the exact weight of an afterthought. In my family's household, affection was a currency I was never permitted to earn. My parents moved through their grand, drafty house with a sharp, transactional efficiency that always stalled whenever their eyes fell upon me. My older brother was the investment. I was merely the overhead. If I scraped my knee, I was scolded for ruining his trousers. If I ranked top of my class, my report card was silently placed on the refrigerator under a magnet, unread, while my brother's mediocre achievements were celebrated with lavish family dinners. I grew up believing that my existence was an inherent inconvenience to the world. I learned to walk softly, to keep my voice below the ambient hum of the television, and to never, under any circumstances, ask for something first. When a person spends the first 18 years of their life starving in a dark room, their perception of light becomes dangerously warped. They do not look for the sun. They learn to worship the erratic flicker of a dying match. That match was Ethan. We met during our first year at university. To me, Ethan was everything I was not. Loud, radiant, effortlessly magnetic, and unburdened by the weight of constant rejection. The first time he casually threw an arm around my shoulders and said, "You're a good guy, Theo. I'm glad I met you." Something dangerous fractured inside my chest. It was a completely standard, throwaway sentence. But to a mind that had never experienced a single drop of unconditional warmth, it felt like a torrential downpour. I misjudged it completely. I didn't recognize it as casual camaraderie. My starved soul translated it as a lifetime contract of devotion. For the next 4 years, Ethan constructed a highly specific, toxic ecosystem around me. He fed on adoration, and I was a bottomless well of it. He learned very quickly that he didn't need to give me consistency to keep me loyal. In fact, consistency bred complacency. Instead, Ethan used a method of calculated starvation. He would ignore my texts for days, leaving me to drown in anxiety, wondering what I had done wrong. Then, just as I reached my breaking point, he would show up at my apartment door at midnight, looking tired and murmur, "I really needed to see you today, Theo. You're the only person who truly understands me." And like a dog grateful for a stray scrap of meat thrown from a lavish table, I would melt. I would cook for him, clean his apartment, handle his assignments, and listen to him talk for hours. My self-worth became an item I willingly traded away, piece by piece, just to see him smile at me for an hour. The outsiders saw it clearly. In our shared social circles, I was a running joke. "Here comes Ethan's shadow," they would whisper when I arrived at parties carrying his jacket. "He's not a friend, he's a glorified doormat." Others would laugh, not even bothering to lower their voices when I walked past. I heard them. I felt the hot prickle of shame behind my eyes, but I suppressed it with a terrifyingly stubborn delusion. They don't understand him like I do. I just need to be more patient. I just need to give more. But Ethan's heart was never vacant. It belonged entirely to Julian. Julian was what the elite circles called a canary. A fragile, exquisitely beautiful, and utterly venomous creature who knew exactly how to leverage his own weakness to control others. His relationship with Ethan was a volatile cycle of screaming matches, dramatic breakups, and passionate reconciliations. Whenever Julian threw a tantrum or chased after a wealthier suitor, Ethan would come crashing back into my life, bleeding from his ego. And I, bound by my desperate devotion, would always be there to pick up the shattered pieces. Julian loathed me. Not because he viewed me as a romantic threat. He knew I was socially and financially beneath them, but because my pure, unyielding devotion was a mirror that reflected his own selfishness. He took sick pleasure in demonstrating his absolute authority over Ethan by humiliating me whenever our paths crossed. During our 3rd year, at a crowded rooftop party, Julian purposely knocked a glass of red wine onto the floor. He looked directly at me, his lips curling into a sweet, mocking smile. "Oh, Theo, honey?" Julian purred, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "You're so good at cleaning up after Ethan anyway. Do you mind grabbing a napkin and wiping this up before someone steps in it? You look so natural on your knees." The rooftop went dead silent. Ethan was standing right there, a drink in his hand. I looked up at him, my eyes silently pleading for him to defend me, to say something, anything, to preserve what little dignity I had left. Ethan merely cleared his throat and looked away, taking a sip of his drink. "Just call a waiter, Julian," he muttered carelessly. He didn't defend me. He didn't care. To Ethan, my dignity was an acceptable sacrifice if it kept Julian from throwing another tantrum. I cleaned the wine myself, my hands shaking, while the muted snickers of the crowd burned into my back. The true cruelty began after university. Julian left the country for a high-profile fashion internship abroad, completely cutting Ethan off. Ethan was devastated, but this time he didn't just stay with me for a weekend. He moved into my small, modest apartment. For 1 full year, our dynamic changed. For 365 days, Ethan treated me like a permanent fixture in his life. We shared domestic routines. I would wake up early to brew the exact rare, artisanal tea he liked, serving it to him in bed. We bought groceries together. He even started holding my hand in public, whispering promises into the crook of his neck during late nights on the balcony. "You're my rock, Theo," Ethan would whisper, his thumb brushing over my cheekbone. "I was so blind before. You're the only constant thing in my life. I don't know what I'd do if you ever left me." For the first time in my life, I felt the icy numbness in my chest begin to thaw. I genuinely believed the nightmare was over. I believed my years of suffering, his tolerance of the humiliation, and my absolute submission had finally earned me the right to be loved. I let my guard down completely. I poured every remaining ounce of my soul into building a home for us. Then the clock struck midnight on my fairy tale. It was a Tuesday evening, the exact date marking our 1-year anniversary of living together. I had spent the entire afternoon preparing a lavish, special dinner to celebrate the milestone. The table was set with our finest plates, the candles were lit casting a soft glow across the room, and a small, carefully wrapped anniversary gift sat on his side of the table. The aroma of roasted spices filled the apartment, creating a warmth I thought would last forever. Ethan was sitting on the sofa, scrolling through his phone, when it began to ring. The ringtone was a specific high-pitched chime that hadn't played in a 12-month. My breath hitched in my throat. I watched as the color instantly drained from his face, replaced by a sudden, frantic desperation. He snatched the phone and pressed it to his ear. "Julian? Julian, is that you? You're back? You're at the airport right now." I stood frozen by the dining table, a serving spoon gripped tightly in my hand. "Wait, don't leave the terminal, Julian. Don't go anywhere." Ethan panicked, completely ignoring my presence as he stood up, knocking over a coaster. "You just got back. You must be exhausted. I'm coming. I'll be there in 30 minutes to pick you up." He slammed the phone down and grabbed his leather jacket from the arm of the couch. "Ethan," my voice was small, cracked, trembling under the weight of a sudden, suffocating dread. "Ethan, please. The food is ready. We were supposed to celebrate tonight. It's our anniversary. You promised." He didn't even look at me. He was frantically rummaging through the drawer for his car keys. "Not now, Theo. Julian is back. He's at the airport, stranded and stressed out. I have to go." "But he abandoned you for a year." The words ripped out of my throat, raw and bleeding. I had never raised my voice at him before, but the sheer panic of losing my hard-won paradise pushed me over the edge. "He didn't call you once until he needed something. We've been together for a year, Ethan. You said I was your rock." Ethan finally paused, his hand on the door handle. He turned around, his expression completely devoid of the warmth he had displayed just hours prior. His eyes were cold, filled with an impatient annoyance that cut deeper than any physical blade. "Stop throwing these pathetic tantrums, Theo," Ethan said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Julian just got back from a brutal time abroad and he needs me. I'll be back when he's settled." The front door clicked shut. I stood alone in the candlelight. The silence that followed was heavy, vast, and absolute. I didn't cry. I didn't drop to my knees. I simply looked at the 2 plates set for our anniversary, the food slowly growing cold, and felt something inside me go completely, irrevocably dark. 3 days passed. Ethan didn't call. He didn't text. On the 4th morning, the lock on the front door clicked. I was sitting on the armchair in the living room, my hands folded neatly in my lap, staring blankly at the wall. The door swung open. Ethan walked in, but he wasn't alone. Behind him stood Julian, dressed in a pristine, oversized designer coat, sunglasses resting on the bridge of his nose despite being indoors. Julian looked around my modest apartment with an expression of intense physical disgust. Ethan stopped when he saw me sitting there. He cleared his throat, a brief flicker of guilt crossing his features before it was instantly ironed out by a cold, practical indifference. "Oh, good, you're home," Ethan said, his voice entirely casual. "Theo, you need to pack your things and leave for a bit. Julian's back for good, and his lease on his old place fell through. He needs a quiet, familiar place to rest while we look for a new place together. Your presence here is just going to stress him out right now." Julian stepped forward, leaning his weight against Ethan's shoulder. He looked down at me, a slow, incredibly smug smile creeping onto his perfectly painted lips. "Yeah, Theo," Julian purred, his eyes gleaming with malicious victory. "The air in here is already so cramped. I can't breathe with 3 people in this tiny place. Be a dear and clear out your clutter. Okay?" I didn't move. I didn't blink. I looked at Ethan, the man I had loved with a frantic, self-destroying fervor for years. Ethan shifted uncomfortably under my dead, unblinking gaze. He walked over to the armchair, bending down slightly to whisper in my ear, attempting to use the old, familiar breadcrumbs to keep me hooked. "Look, it's just temporary, Theo," he murmured softly, his voice trying to mimic affection. "You know you're my rock, right? You're always the stable one. Just go stay with your family for a couple of weeks. Once I handle Julian's mood and get him settled, I'll call you. We'll figure things out. Okay? You're always the stable one." Translation: You are the one who tolerates abuse without making a sound. I stood up. I didn't say a single word. I didn't scream, I didn't question, and I didn't shed a single tear. The utter, towering absurdity of my own wasted life hit me with the force of an avalanche, leaving behind a cold, crystalline clarity. I walked past them into the bedroom. I pulled out my 2 suitcases from under the bed. With an eerie, mechanical calmness, I packed my clothes, my shoes, and my documents. I left behind everything Ethan had ever bought me. 20 minutes later, I walked back into the living room, a suitcase in each hand. Julian was sitting on the sofa, scrolling through his phone, while Ethan stood near the window. When Ethan saw me heading straight for the door, he stepped forward, reaching out a hand to grab my arm for a final, manipulative goodbye. "Theo, wait, let me at least." Before his fingers could make contact with my skin, I flinched away with a sharp, violent revulsion. My eyes met his. They weren't filled with anger or heartbreak. They were completely empty, dead, indifferent. I placed my apartment key silently on the kitchen counter. I pulled open the front door, stepped out into the gray, rain-slicked afternoon, and closed the door behind me without once looking back. I did not go home to seek comfort, because my family estate was an architectural vault of conditional expectations. When I arrived at their monolithic house, drenched and hollowed out, my mother didn't even look up from her tablet. "You're tracking mud onto the floor, Theo," she muttered coldly. "Your brother is negotiating an expansion for our firm. We don't have the time to entertain whatever emotional crisis has driven you away from that boy from university." My father entered the foyer, his face etched with sharp corporate malice. "It's fortunate you've returned. Ethan Vance's father called our office this morning. The Vance family just secured the primary logistics network for the entire Eastern Terminal. Your brother is bidding for their handling contract. Unblock the boy's number, go back to his apartment, and ensure he remains pleased until the contract is finalized." I looked at my father. Then I looked at my mother. They didn't see a son who had just been evicted from his own life. They saw a disposable trading chip. "He kicked me out, father?" I said, my voice entirely devoid of inflection. "He brought Julian back into our house. Then you should have been more accommodating," my father snapped, his voice dropping into a low, threatening register. "The lesser piece must always adapt to the greater. You will return to him by tomorrow morning, or you will be entirely severed from this family's assets. You will not receive a single cent of your trust, nor will you have a roof over your head." The silence in the grand foyer stretched, cold and absolute. I looked at the two people who had given me life but had never given me love. I realized that if I stayed, they would pick my bones clean to build my brother's empire. Something inside me snapped. Not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating finality of ice cracking open. "Keep the money," I said softly. Before my father could unleash his rising fury, I dropped my suitcases right there on the floor. I didn't want their house, I didn't want their name, and I didn't want a single thread of clothing bought with their currency. I walked out the heavy front doors into the pouring rain, stripped of my bags, stripped of my family, and entirely broke. I didn't have a car. I didn't have a coat. I just ran. The rain was torrential, stinging my skin and blurring my vision as I sprinted away from the estate. The cold soaked through my thin shirt within seconds, my shoes splashing violently against the asphalt. I ran blindly, driven by a raw, primal need to put distance between myself and the vultures who had raised me. I ran until my lungs felt like they were lining with broken glass, my legs shaking with pure exhaustion. Finally, I reached the old iron bridge that spanned the rushing river at the edge of the district. The water below was a churning, violent black torrent, swollen by the storm. I gripped the cold iron railing of the bridge, leaning heavily against it to catch his breath. I was hyperventilating, my chest heaving as the freezing rain mixed with the hot sweat on my face. I stared down at the dark water, completely overwhelmed, trying to think about my next move. I had no money, no phone, no shelter, and no one in the world who cared if I lived or died. To anyone passing by in the blinding storm, a drenched, shivering young man leaning desperately over the railing of a bridge looked like a tragedy about to happen. Through the sheets of blinding rain, the sudden, high-intensity flare of headlights sliced across the iron railings. I barely had time to turn my head before the sharp screech of tires cut through the roaring sound of the storm. A massive, sleek black luxury sedan swerved with terrifying urgency, slamming to a halt just yards away from me. The driver's door flew open. Before I could even register a footprint, a towering, broad-shouldered figure charged out of the vehicle. Through the downpour, I caught a glimpse of his face, and it was twisted in absolute visceral panic. It was Alex Volkov. Alex reached me in a heartbeat. Before I could utter a sound, two massive, incredibly strong arms collided with my torso, ripping me violently away from the iron railing. He locked his arms around my chest, pulling me hard against a solid, heavy frame that was trembling violently with raw terror. "Don't do it!" His voice ripped through the storm, a rough, fractured roar completely stripped of its usual corporate restraint. His grip was suffocatingly tight, anchoring me so forcefully against him that I could feel the frantic, erratic thud of his heart against my own shoulder blades. "Don't you dare fucking jump!" I was entirely stunned, my frozen, exhausted muscles completely useless against the crushing strength pinned around me. I didn't fight back, and I didn't argue. I was simply too dazed, my breath catching as he slowly spun me around within his iron grip, forcing me to face him. Up close, Alex completely blocked out the rain-swept sky. He cleared me by half a foot, his wet silk shirt clinging to a chest corded with heavy muscle. But it was his face that made my mind stumble. Those piercing, unmistakable ice-blue eyes were wide, burning with a frantic, unhinged dread as he stared down at me. He truly believed he had been seconds away from watching me vanish into the churning black torrent below. "Alex?" I whispered, my voice cracking from the freezing temperature. A rush of long-buried childhood familiarity hit me, mixed with a sudden, quiet anxiety. We had attended the same elite middle school and high school, but his family had ascended into a multinational Chable empire, a wealthy, untouchable dynasty. Alex had always been the brilliant, fiercely cold heir who commanded every room, while I, trapped in my own family's neglect, had felt too ordinary to exist in his orbit. I had intentionally distanced myself from him, letting our friendship freeze before he eventually went abroad. Seeing him now, I felt a wave of intimidation. Alex didn't ask me any questions. He didn't demand to know where my clothes or my bags were. Without a single word, he swept me up into his arms, lifting me as if I weighed nothing, and carried me through the downpour to the idling sedan. He placed me carefully onto the plush, heated leather passenger seat. The blinding downpour hit the leather seats as Alex slammed the door of the sedan, instantly silencing the roar of the storm outside. The climate control kicked in, flooding the cabin with a wall of intense, enveloping heat. I sat frozen, completely swallowed by the massive tailored wool coat he had draped over my shoulders. My hands trembled violently around the thermal flask of hot tea he had pressed into my palms. Beside me, Alex gripped the steering wheel, his profile completely rigid as he stared straight ahead through the water-slicked windshield. He looked impossibly formidable, his jaw clenched tightly, a man shrouded in an unapproachable, heavy silence. Seeing him now after years of separation, a deep, defensive anxiety coiled in my chest. He was the untouchable heir to a global Chable empire, and I was a ruined, hollowed-out ghost. I kept my eyes lowered, expecting him to look at me with the same cold disgust I had received from everyone else in my life. Slowly, the heavy silence cracked as he turned his head, his ice-blue eyes locking onto my pale face. "Where should I drop you?" he asked. His baritone was flat, direct, and carried a formal, heavy chill. The question hit me like a physical blow. The reality of my utter abandonment crashed back down on my chest. I looked up at him, my pride completely collapsing as a fresh, uncontrollable wave of hot tears welled in my eyes and spilled over my pale cheeks. I have nowhere to go, Alex," I whispered, my voice cracking completely. "I don't have anywhere left." I watched his eyes darken, a volatile shadow sweeping across his chiseled features. He didn't cross-examine me, and he didn't demand to know the details of my trauma. He simply stared at me with an unyielding, intense clarity. "Then you stay with me," Alex delivered. "I have an estate in the residential sector. You will live there." My low self-worth instantly flared up, making me flinch. The thought of becoming a pathetic charity case to a powerful, wealthy acquaintance terrified me. "No, Alex, I can't. I don't want to be a burden to you." Alex leaned slightly across the console, his massive frame shadowing me, his physical presence immense but entirely protective. There was no sharpness in his voice, just a calm, absolute certainty. "You are not a burden," he murmured, his deep voice low and steady. "My estate is large, and I don't tolerate strangers. You will live there, maintain the house, and manage my daily schedule. You will essentially become my personal assistant. In exchange, you occupy the house. Do we have a deal?" Looking into those unwavering blue eyes, I felt a strange, quiet sense of safety beneath his intimidating exterior. He was offering me a job, a way to keep my dignity intact. I nodded softly. "Okay, I'll work for my stay." The next morning, I woke up in a guest room that was larger than my entire old apartment. When I walked into the massive walk-in wardrobe, I froze. The racks were completely filled with premium, tailored suits, heavy cashmere sweaters, and silk shirts, all in my exact size. When Alex came down to the dining room, dressed in his impeccable charcoal three-piece suit, I immediately stepped forward, my voice tense with embarrassment. "Alex, this is too much. I can't accept these clothes. I am just here to clean and manage your schedule." Alex didn't look up from his tablet, taking a slow sip of his black coffee. His face was an unbending mask of stone. "You are my assistant now, Theo. You will be accompanying me to the corporate headquarters and high-profile meetings. You need to look the part. If you walk into my office looking like that, people will think the Volkov conglomerate does not pay its employees well, or that I treat my staff poorly. Wear them." His words were cold and practical, so I quietly accepted his reasoning, assuming it was all just a matter of corporate image to him. But as the weeks began to pass, our routine turned into a series of quiet, baffling contradictions. I had agreed to be his assistant and housekeeper, but I quickly realized that Alex never actually let me do anything. Whenever I picked up a vacuum or tried to dust the grand foyer, a team of professional estate staff would gently stream into the room, politely taking the tools out of my hands. "Mr. Volkov's orders, sir," the head housekeeper would say with a respectful bow. "We handle the heavy cleaning." Even at the office, my desk was right inside his massive executive suite, but the heavy lifting, the grueling data entry, and the stressful logistics were always seamlessly rerouted to other senior employees and secretaries before they ever reached my desk. Whenever I asked for more work, Alex would simply slide a sleek portfolio of interior design concepts or architectural blueprints toward me and say smoothly, "Review these and give me your notes. That is your priority." Instead of a grueling corporate grind, my days became entirely pampered. Alex began taking me to exclusive Michelin-starred restaurants for lunch and dinner, guiding me past flashing paparazzi and high society crowds without a word. He would order rich, nourishing dishes and silently slide them toward my side of the table, watching intently until I finished every bite. Slowly, the rigid armor around my heart began to fracture. When we were at the estate in the evenings, the intimidating corporate giant seemed to melt away. We started sharing quiet meals at the kitchen island, away from the grand dining room. We began sitting on the massive leather sofa in the living room, watching old movies or documentaries on the screen. He rarely spoke more than a few sentences, but he was always there, his massive, warm presence anchored right beside me, casting a protective shield over my fragile world. For a boy who had spent his entire life being invisible, Alex's silent, heavy consideration felt like an absolute flood of warmth. The fragile peace we had built shattered on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Alex was in a high-level boardroom meeting on the lower floors, and he had asked me to retrieve a specific set of quarterly real estate files from the vault in his private executive office. I walked behind his massive mahogany desk, opening the heavy oak cabinets to search for the folder. As I pulled out a stack of documents, my eyes fell upon a thick, matte black file hidden at the very back of the shelf. There was a small, white label on the corner. It had my name on it, Theo. My hand trembled as I reached for it. I shouldn't have opened it, but curiosity and a sudden, sharp spike of anxiety overrode my judgment. I flipped the cover open, and my breath completely stalled in my throat. Inside was a meticulously detailed, comprehensive investigation report. There were printouts of my old bank statements, copies of my university records, and a brutal timeline-by-timeline breakdown of my 4 years with Ethan. It detailed every eviction, every public humiliation, the malice of Julian, and the exact financial transactions my family had tried to cut with Ethan's father using me as a bargaining chip. There were even surveillance photographs of me standing drenched on the iron bridge, looking hollow and broken. A wave of intense, suffocating humiliation rushed through my veins, turning my blood to ice. He knew. He had known everything from the very first day. The suits, the lunches, the gentle treatment. It wasn't because of a corporate image or a casual assistant job. He had investigated me like a broken specimen. He had read through the most pathetic, degrading chapters of my life while I sat beside him on the couch, completely oblivious. The door to the executive office clicked open. Alex stepped into the room, loosening his silk tie, his massive frame instantly dominating the space. "Theo, did you find the—" He stopped mid-sentence. His ice-blue eyes dropped to the black folder gripped tightly in my shaking hands, and the color instantly drained from his chiseled face. For the first time since I had met him, the absolute, unbending composure of Alex Volkov cracked, replaced by a sudden, stark panic. I stood up from behind the desk, my chest heaving, hot tears of absolute shame and anger blinding my vision. I marched straight up to him, slamming the file against his chest. Did you get entertained learning about my pathetic past? I cried out, my voice cracking, raw and bleeding with a lifetime of pent-up agony. Is that what this was, Alex? A game? Did you have fun reading about how my own family hated me? About how I was treated like a dog, a side piece, and a glorified doormat by the man I gave my soul to? Were you laughing at how pathetic I am while you pampered me with your charity? Theo, no, Alex gasped. His hands shot out, gripping my shoulders. His touch was trembling violently, a wild, unhinged desperation flooding his ice-blue eyes as he stared down at my tear-stained face. Listen to me. Breathe. It's not like that. I swear to God. It's not like that. Then what is it? I screamed, trying to push against his massive chest. But he held me firmly, his large hands anchoring me against him as if he were terrified I would dissolve into ash if he let go. I was so embarrassed. I didn't want anyone to know how worthless I am. And you investigated me. You looked at my scars like they were a corporate report. Because I wanted to kill them. Alex roared back, his rough baritone vibrating violently through the entire room, completely shattering his silent exterior. His grip on my shoulders tightened, his chest heaving as he stared down at me with an intense, burning agony. I ordered that report because when I saw you on that bridge, my entire world stopped spinning. I thought you were going to jump. Theo, I thought I was going to watch you die. I needed to know who broke you, so I could systematically tear their lives apart. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, staring up at him in utter shock. I didn't view you as an entertainment, and I don't pity you. Alex rushed out, his voice rough, fractured, and completely stripped of his usual pride. Theo, I have loved you since we were 7 years old. My mind completely stumbled. What? You forgot? Alex whispered, his large palms moving up to cup my face, his thick thumbs gently wiping away the hot tears spilling over my cheeks. His ice-blue eyes were swimming with a fierce, protective devotion. In the garden of the old district estate when we were children, my father had just lined my back with bruises, and I was hiding beneath that old oak tree, wishing I didn't exist. You sat down right beside me. You held my hand and promised, when we grow up, I'm going to marry you, Alex. That way, no one can ever hurt you again. A sudden, brilliant flash of memory exploded in my mind. The golden summer light, the fierce, bruised little boy, and the solemn childhood promise I had completely buried beneath years of emotional trauma and neglect from my family. Alex! I breathed, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. You distanced yourself from me in middle school and high school, Alex continued, his voice shaking with a raw, overwhelming power. You thought I was cold, thought I was an arrogant elite who was above you. But I wasn't cold, Theo. I was just a terrified boy who didn't know how to talk to you without pushing you away. I let you go to university, and I went abroad to secure my position in the Empire so I could finally come back and protect you. And then my secretary sent me a report saying you were with Ethan Vance. He let out a low, rough sound of pure, unadulterated pain. It broke my heart. I locked myself away abroad because every time I saw you destroying yourself for a man who didn't deserve to look at you, I wanted to burn this city to the ground. And then, that rainy night on the bridge, the universe dropped you back into my arms. I saw it as my final, desperate chance to win you, to show you the love you actually deserved, the love your family and that coward never gave you. The words hit my starved soul like a torrential downpour, completely washing away the final remnants of my past, my insecurities, and my doubts. He hadn't been mocking me. He had been worshipping me from the shadows for 15 years. Alex, I choked out, wrapping my arms frantically around his neck, pulling myself up to press against him. He didn't wait another second. He leaned down and his lips met mine. The kiss was a declaration of total, unyielding ownership. It was hot, demanding, and incredibly deep, parting my lips with a dominant urgency that left me completely breathless. His tongue swept inside, claiming every corner of my mouth, while his heavy hands slid down to my waist, lifting me effortlessly off the floor to press me tightly against the edge of his massive desk. I let out a low, needy cry against his lips, my fingers digging into the thick muscles of his back as I drowned in the sensation. The physical intimacy that followed was heavy, intense, and filled with a profound depth, a silent, physical reassurance that read, "I have you. You are safe. You are my true love." From that afternoon on, our dynamic shifted into a deep, consuming relationship. I was no longer his assistant. I was his partner, moving into the master suite of the estate. Alex's silent care transformed into a fierce, intense devotion, but with that devotion came an air of volatile, unyielding possessiveness. A week after our confrontation, a young, handsome courier arrived at the main gates of the estate to deliver a package of high-end architectural drawing supplies I had requested. The courier smiled warmly at me, offering a casual, flirtatious wink as I signed the digital clipboard. "You have a really beautiful smile, you know? Are you new to this district? Maybe I could show you around sometime." Before I could even process the words, the front door of the estate swung open. Alex stepped out onto the porch, his suit jacket removed, his sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms corded with veins. The moment his ice blue eyes landed on the courier standing close to me, a dark, suffocating aura exploded from his frame, rolling across the courtyard like a winter storm. He walked down the steps, his heavy leather shoes clicking against the stone with lethal precision. He stepped directly between the courier and me, his massive, broad-shouldered back completely blocking the man from my sight. Without a single word, Alex snatched a stack of high-denomination bills from his pocket, threw them carelessly onto the courier's clipboard, and grabbed the heavy box with one hand. His other hand wound firmly around the back of my neck, his thick thumb anchoring itself right against the pulse point on my throat. With a slow, dominant pressure, he guided me back into the house, slamming the heavy oak door shut. He set the box down with a heavy thud, turning me around to pin me gently against the kitchen island. His face was inches away from mine, his ice blue eyes burning with a dark, erratic jealousy. "You don't talk to them," he growled, his deep voice rough, vibrating with a raw, unrestrained possessiveness. "You don't look at them. You don't smile at them." I stared up at him, my heart hammering against my ribs, but I wasn't scared. I saw the terrifying depth of how much he wanted me, how fiercely he guarded what was his. I reached up, intertwining my fingers in his dark hair, pulling his lips down to mine. "I only look at you, Alex," I whispered against his mouth. 3 months later, my confidence had been entirely restored under Alex's unwavering protection. I moved through high society with an effortless, calm elegance, my spirit completely whole. Then came the annual City Business Gala, a high-profile event held at a luxury glass pavilion in the financial heart of the city. Alex had to attend as the keynote speaker, and he brought me with him, his heavy arm securely wound around my waist as we entered the grand hall, announcing my position to the entire world. During the mid-evening, Alex was called away to a private room for a brief meeting with international ministers. He looked at me, his eyes flashing with that instant, sharp jealousy. "Stay near the balcony. Do not talk to anyone. I will be back in 5 minutes." I smiled softly, nodding. "I'll be right here, Alex." I stood near the glass balcony, a flute of champagne in my hand, when a sudden, familiar scent of expensive cologne hit my senses. A profound, chilling indifference washed over me as a voice spoke from behind my shoulder. "Theo?" I turned around slowly. Standing before me was Ethan. He looked completely ruined. The reality had finally set in for Ethan. Julian's career abroad hadn't just paused. It had completely crashed. Julian had only come crawling back to leech off Ethan's money and status. Without me there to act as an emotional buffer and clean up their disasters, their relationship had become a parasitic black hole. Julian had drained Ethan's accounts to fund his failing delusions, and Ethan's family business was now on the verge of bankruptcy. Ethan had finally realized the canary's true, greedy nature, and he looked desperate, hollow, and pathetic. "Theo," It really is you? Ethan breathed, stepping forward, his hands reaching out instinctively. I've been looking for you everywhere. I went to your family. They told me you walked out. Theo, please, you have to listen to me. Julian and I... It was a mistake. He just used me. He ruined everything. I miss my rock, Theo. Please come back to the apartment. I kicked Julian out. It's yours. You can't just erase 4 years. Ethan reached out, his fingers desperately grabbing my wrist. Before his fingers could even warm against my skin, a massive, dark shadow fell over both of them. The atmospheric pressure in the entire pavilion instantly dropped to absolute zero. A hand, massive, heavy, and corded with thick veins, settled firmly around Ethan's wrist, right over where he was touching me. The grip was so sudden, so immensely powerful, that Ethan let out a sharp gasp of genuine physical pain, his fingers instantly letting go of me as his bones ground together under the pressure. Alex stood there, his massive frame completely towered over Ethan, his broad shoulders blocking out the light of the entire gala. His ice-blue eyes were fixed on Ethan with a terrifying, homicidal stillness. Alex Volkov, my partner stated. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone that carried the absolute weight of a death sentence. The name hit Ethan like a physical blow. The color entirely drained from his face, leaving him a pasty, trembling gray. His family's entire shipping logistics firm existed solely on the contracts of the Volkov conglomerate. One word from this man, and Ethan's family would be bankrupt by tomorrow morning. Alex didn't look at Ethan's panic. He looked down at me, his hand releasing Ethan's crushed wrist only to smoothly wind around my waist, pulling me flush against his large frame in an undeniable public display of total ownership. Theo, Alex murmured, his voice softening just a fraction, though his eyes remained fixed on the trembling boy before us. Does this garbage know you? I looked at Ethan. I saw the tears, the terror, the absolute ruin in my former love's eyes. Then, I looked up at Alex, my lips curling into a slow, calm, and breathtakingly cold smile. No, I said smoothly, my voice echoing clearly in the silence. He's just an old acquaintance throwing a pathetic tantrum. It's embarrassing. Let's go home, Alex. The exact words Ethan had used to destroy my soul had just been handed back to him, wrapped in a cold, aristocratic indifference. Alex turned his gaze back to Ethan, his eyes narrowing into 2 slits of ice. You heard my partner, Alex delivered, his voice dropping into a low, terrifying whisper. If you ever breathe the same air as him again, I will ensure your family legacy vanishes from the financial registers by tomorrow noon. Now clear out of my sight. As Ethan dropped to his knees on the polished marble floor, weeping violently, a sudden commotion flared near the entrance of the VIP lounge. My parents and my older brother stepped forward from the crowd. They had seen me standing beside the most powerful billionaire in the hemisphere, and their faces were twisted with a sudden, disgusting greed. My father stepped forward, his corporate malice replaced by a sycophantic smile. Theo, there you are. We've been looking for you. Your brother's firm is trying to secure an international design contract with the Volkov conglomerate. Introduce us to Mr. Volkov. Tell him we are your family. I looked at the people who had raised me in a dark room, the people who had told me to return to my abuser just to secure a contract. I felt absolutely nothing. Before I could even speak, Alex shifted his position, his massive body completely shielding me from their sight, his arm tightening around my waist like a wall of iron. He looked down at my family, his ice-blue eyes flashing with a terrifying, absolute disdain. You have no connection to this man, Alex stated, his deep baritone echoing with a dangerous, chilling finality that made my father instantly freeze in his tracks. Theo belongs to me. He answers to no one else, and his name is entirely severed from your bloodline. If I see your firm attempting to approach my partner or my offices again, I will ensure your assets are liquidated by the end of the business week. Security, remove these people from the pavilion. The guards instantly stepped forward, aggressively escorting my stunned, pale family out into the rain. I didn't look back. As the glass doors of Alex's sleek, black limousine closed us into a world of leather, warmth, and absolute safety, I leaned my head against his massive shoulder. I reached down, my fingers intertwining with his large, warm hand. The winter had finally ended, and the happily ever after was entirely ours.